Hey Ryan, how do I get project-based learning started at my school? I've gotten some form of this question nearly every day for the last decade from engaged educators just like you. So at Magnify Learning, we've created a free download to get you started. Whether you're a superintendent, principal, coach, or teacher, go to whatispbl.com to get started on your project-based learning journey today. Are you ready to bring project-based learning to your school? The PBL Simplified Podcast will help equip you for your PBL journey with weekly need-to-knows, engaging interviews, PBL showcases from facilitators in the classroom, and PBL leadership episodes to move you towards a successful implementation of PBL. Because every learner deserves to be a part of an inspiring story, and we see daily that project-based learning helps make this happen. If you want me to answer your PBL need-to-know on the podcast, visit whatispbl.com and click on Ask Ryan to submit your question.
Thank you for joining me on the PBL Simplified Podcast. I'm Ryan Stoyer, founder and CEO of Magnify Learning. We love project-based learning. We love everything about it, and that's what PBL Simplified is all about. Talking about project-based learning, breaking it down for you so you can bring it into your classroom and your school. Today, we've got a bonus episode because there are 5 Wednesdays in June. The first and third Wednesday of a month, we talk about leadership within project-based learning environments. If you want to bring PBL to your school or your classroom or your district, you need to think through that plan. And there are other people that have done that at this point. So we're going to start talking about the leadership side of things. So whether you're a superintendent, principal, coach, or teacher, if you're in a leadership position, the first and third Wednesdays are where we're going to break down what does it mean to be a leader in education, what does it mean to bring project-based learning into your area of influence. Because if you just bring it in and put it down on the desk and say, ready, go, it's likely not going to go that well. But what is really positive is that we've had a lot of implementation over the last decade, and we know what works, we know what doesn't work, and that's what I share on the first and third Wednesday. On the second Wednesday of the month, on the PBL Simplified Podcast, we're going to do a PBL showcase episode. So we're going to bring a teacher on or a group of teachers, and they're going to talk about a specific PBL unit, and they're just going to pull back the curtain. They're going to talk about the standards. They're going to give us some learner stories. We love stories here. They're going to tell us about community impact. They're going to break down one of their PBL units for you so that you can hear like what is PBL? What is it that people are doing out there? And probably swipe some ideas and bring them into your classroom and your school, which we think you should. On the fourth Wednesday, we bring in some kind of an interview. So it might be a principal, it might be a teacher, it might be somebody outside of the classroom even that can bring some value to you as the listener to bring back to your school. How do you implement PBL? What's worked for them? What hasn't worked for them? But we really dive deep with one person into that piece. But today, we have the 5th Wednesday in June. So on the 5th Wednesday, we bring a bonus episode, something maybe outside of the norm. Sometimes I explore some piece that I'm passionate about and bring that to you into PBL because they're gonna mesh, they're gonna overlap. And today is one of those. Today we're going to talk about being an entrepreneur. Now, how does entrepreneurialism fit into the PBL classroom? This is a question we actually got. So we've got this question, how does entrepreneurial fit in the classroom? Can my kids make money while doing a PBL unit? And I love the idea. I love being an entrepreneur. I love coaching other entrepreneurs because what it does is you're bringing in problem solving, you're thinking critically, you're involved with other people, you have to have empathy, you got to think through, what does your audience need, what does your customer or partner need? And these are really great places to put our learners where they're starting to think about what is it that other people need, what makes them tick, how are they thinking? And they start to think outside of themselves and how they can serve others, which is what entrepreneurialism really is. How do we serve others? And when we bring this into our PBLs, I think it just brings these natural connections and problem-solving pieces. Like, is my item overpriced? Is it underpriced? Am I going to make a profit? What am I going to do with my profit? How do I do a quick prototype to make sure it's going to fit the market? And then how do I refine that prototype? So there's all kinds of growth mindset pieces we can work in here that fits really well into bringing community partners in. I love some of the work where we have some entrepreneurs in the classroom that are making money, which is a great skill for our learners to to learn and have as they head on to their next adventure beyond high school, that they know how to make their own living. Even if they're going to be an entrepreneur, which our guest today is going to talk about, they might be inside of a traditional organization like a UPS or a Dell, a bigger organization, but you can be an entrepreneur and have these skills that we talk about in project-based learning to really have you be successful, to be empowered rather than passive, which I think is really at the heart of project-based learning, is how do we empower the awesomeness that's already inside of our learners. So obviously I get fired up about entrepreneurialism, and I brought somebody on for this episode, brought on Austin Brooks from CEO, and that's what he does. He brings entrepreneurialism into the classroom. He brings community partners in. I actually have him break down his system a little bit because I love the nuts and bolts. I love the piece that he does. I also love that sometimes bigger school districts can get some of this work in, but Austin has a process where it's community-based, and our rural suburban districts that may be a little smaller can bring in a lot of community partners into this entrepreneurial venture. And what we see, and Austin's going to share some really great stories, and you're going to hear me kind of poke again and again, hey, give us another story, give us another story. So you're going to want to make sure you hear those. He's got one gamer that's made $500,000 on his idea. Like, they're making real money as they're doing this. They're creating real businesses. And we see a lot of real change in the lives of our learners. And that's really what we're looking for. So here's a bonus episode. It's going to be a little bit longer than normal. You're going to hear me get a little fired up about entrepreneurialism and project-based learning. It's a piece that I am super, super passionate about. So if we can help out, if I can help out, or Austin can help out, you know that you can always go to whatispbl.com, and there's an Ask Ryan button, and you can just put your question or your comment right in there, and we'll make sure that we address that with you or on the podcast. Enjoy this episode.
All right, PBL Simplified audience, we have a bonus episode. I've got Austin Brooks from CEO, and I didn't even tell him he was the bonus episode, so he's going to have to bring it, but he always does. If you don't know Austin, you should. So in his bio, he's an 8-time Mid-America Emmy winner for his work on feature and short-length films. Accomplished content producer, strategist, and entrepreneur. And we're really going to talk about this entrepreneurship piece that he's got. But before we do that, in his bio, he's a connector. So you may not know Austin Brooks, but just like I think that Kevin Bacon game that was out a while ago, he likely knows someone who's just a degree or two away from you. Because Austin, I think, knows everybody. Austin, thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, happy to be here. And I love the work that you're doing through Magnify Learning. So it's an honor.
Oh, yeah. I'm super excited. So we're going to jump into CEO, which is creating entrepreneurial opportunities. It's part of Austin's work. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial piece. Like, how did you get in this space? So for me, like, my dad was an entrepreneur. Like, he had video stores, and I would go and fix the lights and whatever needed to be done. So the Magnify Learning, this entrepreneurial piece that we have here, we're a large organization, but we keep this entrepreneurial spirit that we can customize things and move quickly. Like, how did you get into the entrepreneurial world?
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, it goes back to junior high school. I think about for me as a high school kid, I played sports. I was super involved in stuff in school, but I wanted a flexible job, but I wanted to make good money. And so I was kind of like the Bobby Boucher of my larger neighborhood, and we lived kind of near this lake. And so if you were, it was summertime, you might see me pushing my lawnmower or driving a riding mower just on the street, on the road to go to my next, lawn that I would mow. But for me, back then, my parents really wanted me to own it. So, hey, if you had these yards, it was on you. You had to pay for your gas, you had to pay for your mowers, and you learn if you have to pay for it, then I have to make this much money to cover these costs, right? You learn what cash flow is, right? And then I also learned how to manage my own schedule because I like the flexibility with all the other things that I had going on that lawn mowing gave me. But I also learned that the customer had expectations. So, Austin, as a young buck, I would pick the lawns I would mow based on what cars they would have in the driveway, because I figured if they had a nice car, they could pay me what I wanted to, make mowing their lawn. So I tried to find the best cars, best lawns, And yeah, that was my gig, actually even into college a little bit. So I had the entrepreneurial bug at a young age, but even working for Midland Institute, which is our nonprofit that supports these CEO programs all over the nation, we believe entrepreneurs think different.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today. Again, as this bonus episode, we've got this extra week in June, so we want to crush it, is you're bringing the entrepreneurial spirit to classrooms. This idea of thinking differently or being empowered, right? Not passive, but being empowered. All these employability skills that we talk about in project-based learning, we want to bring them through community partners. And your group is just doing that in a really powerful way. Do you want to give us kind of an overview of how you're bringing entrepreneurialism to the classroom?
Sure. But first, I'd like to comment on, you said employability skills, the fact that you're bringing that language into your community. I just want to compliment that. We call it soft skills. I also really like the terminology foundational skills. So whatever you call it, the fact that you and the amazing educators and all the wonderful people listening that follow the movement of Magnify Learning, what makes me so proud, everyone's starting to identify that students might need something a little different. So how do we do that? How do we infuse this, project-based learning? And that's absolutely, what we do. And so we've got this year-long immersive program called CEO. And so it's counts towards high school graduation. It's a part of, juniors and seniors in high school. It's kind of a capstone program. But what's so interesting about it is, it's very similar to kind of what you do in the fact that you inspire people to create these learning environments that help students find out about themselves. And so that's, I think, why there's such a natural parallel between our organizations and why we enjoy kind of offline talking so much, because we just see the need for, these soft skills.
I would just want to make sure that our listeners get to kind of know what CEO is and how it works in the schools, because I know, because we do talk offline a lot. I just want to make sure that they know kind of a base premise. Maybe you should tell a CEO story before you give us the nuts and bolts, because I really want to get into your stories, because you have some amazing work that these learners are doing in the school system and then outside of the school as well. So wherever you want to start, really, either a story or kind of the nuts and bolts, so we can get to know you and CEO better.
Yeah. Well, if you just want to get to it and see what CEO is, you can always go to discoverceo.com. It's a great way just to see an entry level of what does CEO do for the students? What does it do for, the school system? And then what does it do for the community as a whole? And so what's interesting is you hear that old adage that it takes a community to raise, a kid, right? So we just have kind of brought that in. We call our learning environment community driven, right? And so what that means is, again, a year-long program that has two major project-based learning elements. They do a class business first semester, and they do an individual venture second semester. And so class business, they get to learn to work with different types of people, someone who might think different or want to do something a different way. So they work with their own their own immediate CEO program to bring this, event or product to market in their actual community. But it doesn't stop at theoretical terms. There's real money on the line, and they have to create this class business. And then second semester, when they're tired of group work, great. You got to do it on your own. So every student that goes through CEO nationwide creates their own individual venture. And so this individual business can be anything from, a candle business, a lawn care business. There's some amazing projects these students engineer. And so that's kind of the core project that happens within the year. But the secret sauce, and I'll just openly share it today, is CEO never takes place in a classroom. It always takes place in a business. So over the course of the 10 months that they're in school, and in the CEO day to day, they are doing business visits. Each week they may do 2 business visits. So they actually get to see businesses that are in their own home community. And it's interesting. I don't know if there's any listeners today that are business owners, or they see sometimes the best talent moving away from their towns. But if you want to counter the brain drain, CEO is a great step in that at a high school level, because we believe high school kids today see opportunity everywhere else except right in front of their face. I mean, even for you, if you think about the community you live right now, how many businesses do you drive by but have no clue what's in that building? So we want to tear down those walls within this year-long program with CEO, where students can they can go and see the local floral shop. They can go and see the local dry cleaner. These are operations and business models. They have no clue how they work. But if they're going to have to become entrepreneurs and learn that entrepreneurial mindset, the best way for them to also learn is to see experts doing it. So it's not a textbook-driven course, but it's a community-driven course where if they're going to learn about, engineering, or if they're going to learn about financial literacy, if they're going to learn about how to have a great marketing idea, they need to go to, local businesses in town and experts in that field. And so they do 40 business visits. and another 40 guest speakers come through their class on the course of this school year. So heavy community immersion plus project-based learning. And then there's a one-to-one mentor paired with these students because we want them to learn how to be connectors and that their network is their net worth.
Man, that's so good. And I feel like I should tell our viewers as well, like, I'm not plugging CEO, like Austin's not a sponsor, right? That's paid us to be on or anything like that. But if you hear inside of his explanation of CEO, like, how many community partner interactions are those learners having? Just a ton, right? And that's really the secret sauce of project-based learning. So what I see in CEO is just really leveraging this community partner aspect in such a neat way. And as you can imagine, really, really cool stories come out of that, no matter what socioeconomic status our learners are in, rural, urban, or suburban, wherever it is. When our learners interact with community partners, especially with this one-on-one mentorship and the doing that's happening, there's some really neat just life change that happens, right? Austin, can you give us one of those stories?
Sure. Yeah. Even as you set up, like just how we've got connected and, you invited me on, like I am super passionate about this. So, all your listeners have been forewarned. If I'm fired up or if I seem like a sales guy, I just see the transformation year after year. And so what's interesting is, who's CEO for? I kind of want to take a step back and answer that question. So when I'm working with like a superintendent principal or just key people in a school district, they're always like, Austin, is CEO for like straight A college bound students? Is this for like BC middle of the line students or even DF high risk students? My answer is always yes. And so one thing that we have fought hard for year over year, and we're in about 300 school districts nationwide, is there's no GPA requirement, there's no prereq for CEO, because entrepreneurial thinkers, they don't think in terms of GPA. That doesn't mean they might not be a straight A student. That might also mean they've struggle to get through school. And so this is where, what brings me to stories. We see students that just that transformation where if they're a straight A student, they might start CEO. Just tell me what I need to do to get the grade. Where's the syllabus? And they'll have, their panic will be there, but then they realize, whoa, they learn how to learn. They learn that they can learn to think on their own, right? And then they're not conditioned to kind of maybe the way that traditional school has, taught them that, it's just about regurgitating the information and throwing it up on a test. If they're hungry to learn something, they can go after it, right? Now, I'll tell you, for those BC middle line students or even those DF high risk students, some of them, this is what they've been waiting for because it's hands-on learning. So, just student expectations. One thing I was thinking about was I think sometimes we expect too little from students. And so the first story I'll tell you, there's a young man by the name of Adam Walters. Some of these names I'll say because publicly there's stuff out there about him and we've shared their story and it's okay to share. Some of these students, I'm going to change their names just because of the stories I'll tell you. But Adam Walters, he created a game. He was a video gamer. I don't know, parents listening or teachers, if you got any gamers in your classroom, he's just your typical gamer dude, right? And he's a very introverted gamer where he'd sit down in his gaming studio and have all the confidence in the world. But when he would go to school, even before CEO, he's pretty introverted, didn't interact with his peers a lot. And so when he got into CEO, because there's this community immersion, and these are his words, this is a direct quote. Adam said, he's like, I threw up every day for the first 3 weeks of class because talking to the grown-ups is scary. And so he, for him, he had to overcome, the soft skill of being able to shake someone's hand, look them in the eyes and have a conversation. And what really allowed kind of the light bulb to go off, the aha moment for Adam, was he said, if I'm going to develop any of these games that I really like playing, I'm going to need to work with other developers. And I think these people skills might help me. So he bought in. And so it's interesting. He goes from this kid that's being a gamer to a kid that makes games. So his individual business, imagine that, he creates a game called Ghost Simulator that's on Roblox. For those of you who are parents, you have kids that play games, Roblox. If you don't know what it is, ask them, they will tell you. And the reason I'm saying you might have to ask about it, I'm not a gamer, so I had a lot of questions to ask to understand Adam's success and even his transformation, right? Because I knew he was creating a game, but I actually pulled his mentor aside at his trade show. And let me take a moment to pause to say, when these students create their own individual business, every student highlights it at a local trade show that's put on by this local CEO program, right? And so this trade show, it's not a show and tell, it's a show and sell. This isn't a science project that mom and dad you make, or the volcano that you make the night before for Johnny and Susie, they turn it in and get credit. They've had to work on weeks. They've had to do a banker day to check their finances. They've had to do kind of a pitch day or a Shark Tank style pitch where they, really refine their idea. And then by the time they're selling their product, it's ready to be sold, right? And so Adam's booth, I remember going to his trade show, walking by, and I was like, wait, is this game like actually up and going? I was kind of like doubtful. And he's like, yeah, you can play right now. And then I said, how long has it been up? He's like, oh, it's been up for a week and a half. I'm like, how do you make money? He's like, well, it's through Roblox. He's like, I can explain it after I talk to some more customers. But I'm like, well, how much have you made? He's like, I've made 52,000 since last week.
Whoa.
And so I like, that's where I was like, all right, I'm going to have to do some research in the gaming world. But I pull his mentor aside and I said, conservatively, what do you think Adam's going to make before the end of the year? This is in May, right? And he goes, this kid will make $500,000 before the year's out. So he goes from being the kid that's mortified, that's sick to his stomach to talk to grownups, to then leading a team, because he started his game build, I think it was February 2nd and then May 2nd. I remember the reason I remember that was the trade show. It took, in that span of time, he worked with 6 developers that he had to lead to build the Ghost Simulator game. And so just to see what 16, 17, 18-year-old students are capable of, that's why I'm fired up about this. But I also think just a question for all educators or education-minded people is, do we expect too little from students, right? And so I see, just because we've created this environment, students rise to the occasion if we do project-based learning in the right way. So I'll take a breath there, but Adam's kind of the story that quickly jumps into mind, but happy to tell you more if you would like to hear more.
I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why you're a great guest for this bonus episode, right? Is we've been talking about student expectations, right? And are we grossly underestimating what our learners can do? And I think the answer is yes, in almost all environments. Like traditional schooling, definitely we're underestimating what our learners can do. Can we give them opportunities? Like how many of us teachers, like if we're looking at our class and we see our gamers, are we really thinking like, they could probably make $500,000 this year? Like that's not typically what we're expecting from our learners. And I think maybe the secret sauce is also this idea, as we think about project-based learning, we bring these two worlds together, they're synonymous, but we probably can't do that on our own, right? Like as a teacher in a single classroom with the door closed, you can't do that. You can't offer that opportunity. But when you bring in community partners or you interact with, your learners are interacting with a mentor, then suddenly, right, the ceiling's taken off and they can do all kinds of amazing things.
Or you bring in a proven curriculum for, kind of capstone program for your district, right? But we only, again, work with juniors and seniors. So that's where I'm excited about the possibility of what's possible in your classroom. And so one story, if you want to go there, ask me a follow-up, but I'm a student of kind of project-based learning. I had a high school program called Multimedia, and I had 2 world-class educators that just put a camera in my hand. The reason I'm an 8-time Emmy Award winner is because I had a high school teacher put a camera in my hand. Now, one thing I want to say about these world-class educators is, did they know everything about editing theory? Did they know everything about, depth of field and how to, teach me about every lens package that they could put on the camera? No. But they put the equipment in my hand and they gave me space to test and tinker and learn. So in the same way, the CEO students, or even in your classroom, if it's not a proven model, if you're still proving the concepts of these project-based learning things you want to implement and try, I would just say do you have to be a gamer if you want to teach gaming? I don't think so. And so, I mean, Ryan, you said it, you can bring in mentors, community partners, but if students can drive their learning a little bit, if students, it's kind of I don't know how familiar you are with Montessori schools, but like if students have a little bit of control to or input in what their, where their interest lies, if you can build projects where those interests can come out, it is absolutely amazing to see what students are capable of. And I believe at all ages. So, yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's why we differentiate between teachers and facilitators, right? We really want to be facilitators in the classroom, where we're facilitating experiences, allowing our learners to be empowered.
That's awesome.
Step into this work.
Yeah, we don't call any of our CEO, we call them all facilitators as well. And so not that, having a heart of a teacher is super important, but we really want them to be more of the guide on the side versus the sage on stage. And so, we very much use that same language. Sorry to butt in there, but I totally agree. That's awesome.
No, that's definitely it. I mean, it's the good stuff. So, honestly, I just want to hear more stories. But maybe we've got you on here. So what else should I be asking you about student expectations?
Yeah, I want to share a struggle. I've been in this game for 5 years. So I'm an executive director of Midland Institute for Entrepreneurship. And before that, I am a sales guy by trade. So I'm just going to say it as it is. I'm a filmmaker storyteller who really wanted to sell this learning environment. So I went around to communities and school districts saying, hey, here's how that works. And if you want to buy in, here's how you do it. Right. And so I did that and I became executive director. But the reason I tell you a little bit about my history is I don't come from the education world. Now, I will tell you as a high school kid, even when I was mowing those lawns, the first profession I thought I wanted to do that I can clearly remember, I wanted to be a teacher. Why were those two reasons I wanted to be a teacher? First was I had two world-class educators who I'm like, look at the impact they're having. I was interested in the impact. And then two is the next generation's our future, right? And so even at a young age, education has always been important, but getting in the space after my previous professional career in filmmaking, marketing world, all that, I can't say that I understood education fully coming in. And so I've been on a 5-year journey of better understanding, like, how does the system work and how can we be a complement versus just another person that's a naysayer or a disruptor. And the biggest thing I've learned on 5 years of traveling and working with so many different communities is the business world, what all the employers in a community want, and all those business folks that can be really critical of schools, which actually, year after year, the more that goes on, the more that starts to tick me off. But I get why they're saying that. And then what the amazing administrators or teachers that are in these trenches, in these classrooms are seeing and doing, and the pressures that are on them from the state boards of education. What's so fascinating, what I see is everyone cares about the next generation, but they speak different languages because of the kind of the spaces they work. And so I've joked that in my previous role before I became executive director, but very much still today, is I joke that I'm kind of a community therapist until we learn to kind of speak the same language, and business leaders can say, we want this, but then educators can say, hey, this is my expertise in the classroom, and the way that we're going to get to those outcomes is this. Until those conversations happen, education doesn't change. And so I believe even more than just Midland Institute's mission and our CEO program, which is our one, product right now. I want communities to steal from us, and I want, people to get more engaged with their local entrepreneurs or just local experts that exist right in your own entrepreneurial ecosystem or community, right? So I say all of that to say, you guys probably spend, educators listening, or you probably spend a lot of time thinking about the outcomes and really where you want a student to be at the end of the year. And so I thought it would be cool. I can kind of share, as we prepare for a new year every year, how do we as a Midland Institute team stay excited and energized? And so for me, just a new year to see lives impacted, that's enough. That's probably because I do have the heart of an educator, even though I haven't always been in education. So, each year is just a new opportunity to see transformation. It's a new opportunity to see students find their voice and develop their soft skills we're talking about. But for us, it's a new opportunity to see these 5 big outcomes. We want students to be connectors, communicators, creators, owners, and learners. So my mentor taught me this. The architect of CEO, his name is Craig Limbaugh, and he was in education 30 plus years, and he built the framework that all these communities are using today. The reason I bring up Craig was he was that same high school teacher that put a camera in my hand. So for me, this kind of ties into that origin story, which you were kind of prompting earlier. Do you want me to kind of tell the origin of CEO now?
Yeah, I think so. Because as I hear, those pillars that you guys appreciate, is they're all active, right? It's away from passive, bringing on an identity that is empowering. Yeah. So what is that origin story?
Sure. And I will say on those outcomes, being a connector, we want students to learn that they can talk to anyone. And that's actually a perfect setup for the origin story. So in the circle of CEO and all the people who have CEO programs, there's a story about the kid who sparked the CEO movement. But in high school, I was that kid. And my problem in 2005, as a junior in high school, there was this local business leader, and he's a serial entrepreneur, Harvard business grad. He's a really big deal. And I knew he was a big deal because I heard all the adults in my life, they had stories about him, they talked about him, but really started to tick me off as I'm like, I want to know this guy. And Mr. Schultz, that's, Jack Schultz is his name, but Mr. Schultz, I'm like, he wrote this book. I'm like, why can't I want to ask him questions, right? And so I went and told that high school teacher I told you about, Craig Limbaugh, I said, I'd like to meet Mr. Schultz. And what Craig told me that changed my life, he said, Austin, you can talk to whoever you'd like, but you have to set up the first meeting. And so he gave me that permission to connect. And it's, I've never looked back. So listeners, you don't know me, but I've never met a stranger. I love talking to new people. I've got a super curious mind, but a lot of that was cultivated in the classrooms that you all teach, right? And getting that permission to connect, that's all I needed, right? So set up this meeting. I asked him for 30 minutes. I didn't know how to set up a meeting. And so Craig's like, well, he's a pretty busy guy. It might take you a little while to get a meeting. So I had a first request and he didn't respond. I did a second request and got this meeting set up. And long story short, he met with me about after a month of scheduling, getting on his busy schedule. And I had asked him for 30 minutes, but he ended up giving me an hour because I thought we were having a good conversation, but I guess he did too. And so next day I got back to school. They knew my meeting with Jack happened after school. And so I sat down with my 2 teachers at the time. They're like, Austin, how was it? I'm like, he actually knows a thing or two about business. And they're like, yeah, Austin, Jack's a pretty savvy dude. And then the thing that they did that was so wise is they called Jack and they said, hey, you met with Austin. How was it? And he goes, as a business owner, I'm so disconnected what's happening in the hallways of the school and what's happening in a developmental standpoint in the lives of these students. So he goes, for me, it was pretty eye-opening. He's like, I wonder if more students could have conversations like this. And so for me, coming back to Midland Institute and working here has been full circle because those were the men that went and built CEO, and they had no clue what it was. It wasn't a proven model, but they're like, what if we got students outside of the classroom? What if these kind of conversations could happen? And so, that origin ties us right back to those outcomes where, we want these students to be connectors in the same way I had to learn to connect. We want them to be great communicators. And so today, students, I'm holding my cell phone in my hand right now, but they're really good at looking down at their cell phone with thumbs moving really fast, sending text messages or snaps or, scrolling through TikTok, right? But how do they communicate on those platforms? How do they communicate via email? Hey, you know what? These phones, actually, you can pick them up and there can be a voice on the other side. They make calls, that ancient technology. And so they've got to learn the difference between communication types, but we want them to become world-class communicators. And it's amazing in a year-long program how much they can grow as communicators. And then we want them to be creators and doers. We don't want them just to say, hey, there's a problem in the world. I mean, think about if you're a business owner right now listening to this and you've got employees, you want employees that are solution minded that can solve stuff for somebody else is going to figure it out. And I even think as a society, that's one problem. Everyone critiques, but nobody thinks solution, right? So the creator mindset where it's like that problem, I see it. And the beginning of any entrepreneurial mindset or journey is if I solve that problem, or I can solve that problem. And so we want them to realize they can create and do. And then last two, and I think it's worth going through each of these. We want students to have an ownership mindset. We want them to take ownership of their choices, their decisions. They're going to learn to be accountable. So the part of that is they take ownership, succeed or fail. And, that's one question I would ask any educator listening today is there space to fail in your classroom? And I'm not just talking about the grade, but like sometimes failure's a great teacher, right? So taking ownership, there's a lot of layers of things that ownership can be taken in. But then lastly, every student that goes through our learning environment, our proven framework here, they become more hungry to learn. We want students to be lifelong learners. And that learner's mindset is actually, set by that facilitator. And so why Midland Institute exists, and I'll take a breath here and then tell you a little bit more about what we do. But why Midland Institute exists is we want to stay involved as a community partner with the communities that launch CEO, because we want to provide the tools, training, and technology so CEO continues to innovate with the help of the amazing facilitators that are in these business settings that are built. Right. And so facilitators, if they're not hungry to learn, if they're not the most excited in the room, CEO doesn't work. And so we really do a good job of helping communities find the right facilitators for this. But then there's a journey, none of us are perfect. We all need to learn, but there's a great journey we have. We hire a lot of past facilitators onto our staff to mentor and train and teach to make sure that even as, facilitators and leading as leaders of this learning environment, we're learning ourselves. And so that's kind of the two-part way outcomes work. One is we have to know what outcomes we want. And then two, we have to have the education-minded people, the facilitators that know how to implement it and help that environment thrive.
Yeah, and I love you breaking those down because, again, as our listeners are listening, a lot of educators in the classroom, a lot of principals, administrators, there's a lot of things that you can just pull from this, and you like a swipe file. Like if you bring in community partners, amazing things happen, right? So you can start there. Again, I love the CEO program. I've seen the outcomes. I've been to the event. And one piece that's really interesting is, I'm sure there's a principal listening to, okay, cool. What's the cost? Right. But the cost to the school is nil. Is that right?
schools and students don't pay. So when I was talking about, I get frustrated with business leaders and let me tell you a story real quick. This is an interesting one. I was, I'm not going to say where it was, but I was in a room with 6 superintendents. It was a new community. We're getting ready to do a multi-school program, and awesome people in the room. And there's one lady I liked right from the get-go. And the reason I liked her, she asked me the toughest question. She was like critical, but she was like thoughtful, right? And so she was just roasting me that day. But I like good questions, right? So, but I could tell she was coming from a good place with the questions. But what I didn't expect is by the end of the conversation, she actually broke down in tears, and she said, I had another business leader point his finger in my face saying, "You're failing our students," and it was personal, and he blamed her. Right. And it for me, light bulb moment. I mean, I feel emotion right now talking about it because I remember the emotion on her face. Right. So what was interesting is I'm like, that's happening all across this country. There's people who don't understand what's happening inside schools that are blaming them for where our students are at. And you know what I've learned, even coming from the business world, who cares more than most people realize? Administrators and teachers. That's why they're going through all this red tape and all this process, because they care about the freaking kids, right? Yeah. And so I can't, that story hits me. But yeah, I had to tell that one. But
that's it, because one of the things that we talk to administrators about, whether it's principals or superintendents, one of the reasons you need to do project-based learning or jump into something like CEO is we need to get our community partners into the schools so they can see the really cool stuff you're doing. Because otherwise, the news tells the story, or some other event tells the story. We need to tell our local stories to our business partners, to the community that's out there. So we need to get them into the school. And project-based learning is one of those ways to do that. CEO is certainly one of those ways to do that.
Yeah,
Austin, we're gonna wrap here in just a little bit, but so make that point, and then let's figure out how we can connect to you. And we'll put a ton of stuff in the show notes so people can click on those links too.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting for if you're an administrator or even a teacher that wants to bring people in from your community, for a while I questioned, do they want to help? Because do they just want to criticize? Now, if it's a critical-minded person, maybe it's a them issue, right? But I'm amazed by in communities how many people actually want to help. They just don't know where and how. And I think if you can clarify that, you can bring this learning style to your community, right? And so, you had asked me about price, and so schools and students don't pay. The last part I wanted to connect the dot on was we asked these very business leaders to pay for the operating budget of the CEO learning environment. And so, because what is cool is when they invest in with their own money, and we, just so you understand the sustainability of our learning environment, we don't ask one person to write a check. We actually want to have 35 investors to build the operating budget to pay for the curriculum and also the year-to-year operating budget. And that, you might be thinking, what the heck? That seems like a ton of work. That's ridiculous. No, that's 35 people who have money on the line who's going to have an expectation, but that they have to participate in for these outcomes to happen. And so what we see, CEO is one part of a school's curriculum. It's one small part of a community entrepreneurial ecosystem. But if you have any interest, we'd like to be a spark and see other connectivity happen because you start working with someone like Midland Institute and our proven CEO program. So happy to wrap on another story or two, or wherever you like to go, Ryan.
Yeah, would you wrap with a story again, Austin? Appreciate it.
Sure. So I'm so glad you mentioned show notes. There is a video of Adam Walters, who I previously shared. I'll make sure that video, these are 90-second quick watches, but you can hear him in his own voice talk about a CEO experience. So I'll give you that one. A new one that has never been released, and it's coming out here in a month. But I'll make sure it's pre-uploaded for your audience to see it before everyone. There's a young lady by the name of Amelia Rodriguez, and she is amazing, and she has an entrepreneurial mindset, but she's not owning her own company. And so one thing and some metrics that we see we do a pre-impact and a post-impact survey with all our students every year. And so we can kind of track growth. We can track these outcomes, amazing data. One thing that we see, and we are an entrepreneurship program, so we see 67% of students want to continue their business after CEO. That is breaking like every national number. But another question we ask to really hone in, are they saying they're going to keep their business running because they think that's the right answer? We see that 30% are true entrepreneurs, right? And so the national average is somewhere 10, or you see sometimes numbers that are sub 10%, right? So 30% are true entrepreneurs that's impressive. But the question today is, what is the other 70% of students that go through CEO? And we call them entrepreneurs, and they're the best future hires for all your local business owners. Who in your business community doesn't need more solution-minded workforce? So we believe installing the entrepreneurial mindset matters for people who want to continue on their entrepreneurial journey or work for a company with an entrepreneurial mindset. So Amelia Rodriguez is one great story of that, where she wanted to do interior design. And she did own her own interior design business, but she realized she could serve more customers and scale quicker and get to do more of the work she wanted to if she partnered with a local cabinet shop. So Adam's story took place in Southern Illinois. Amelia's story takes place in Southern Indiana. And so we just traveled with her. And I mean, she has some insanely cool stories, like the Ursay's owner of the Colts. Yeah, they did cabinet work and design work for them, whether it's, Bloomington, Indiana, or as far down as Louisville, Kentucky. Like her local cabinet shop in her small town of Washington, Indiana. Stoles is the name of it. Amazing company. She got to know the owner and said, I love interior design. And so seeing these companies locally where these students have went through their CEO program saying, hey, I could create a job with you. And then to see that she's got 5 people that she's leading now as a young 20-year-old, female entrepreneur, but she's doing it within the confines of another business. So very entrepreneurial minded, an amazing interior designer, but she's partnered with the team and gets to do the thing she loves most. Right. And so that video will make sure to share in the show notes. But can I give you, since this is the bonus episode, can I give you one more bonus story?
Yeah, we'll take a bonus story for sure.
All right. And I'll make this one quicker. But to your great question and point, and we just connect so deeply on this, Ryan, is students, we expect too little. I want to tell you the story. We're going to call him Ryan S. And I'm stealing your name. This isn't his name. But he was a student who was known for his athletic prowess on the field, right? He was a football player. And junior year, he blew out his knee. And he was a kid who had big dreams and big ideas that he didn't tell anybody about. And so what I'm curious about is how many students are walking the hallways of your schools, all ages, K through 12, that have big dreams, but they don't know how to bring them to life, right? Or they want to, develop skills in themselves, but they have no clue where to start. Like, I think that's on us as educators. So as Ryan's story progresses, he defines himself based on his ability in athletics because that's a big priority in a lot of schools, right? Or that's what the students perceive as important. But he had a ton of business ideas he never told anyone about, his parents, his friends. But there was one school counselor that said, hey, Ryan, why don't you apply for this class called CEO? It's that tap on the shoulder, right? And, for us, when we're recruiting for the CEO students, sometimes it's a guidance or a guidance counselor, sometimes it's a principal. But there's people within schools that see stuff in students and tap them on the shoulder. That guidance counselor didn't even fully know what the student was capable of, but just said, hey, maybe you should apply. And he saw a space for the first time where he could start practicing business just like he practiced his sport, right? And he was also at a soul searching time because he's like, I don't know if I'm going to get that college scholarship I thought with this injury. And so, CEO is exactly what the doctor ordered in his words. And what he told me, he's like, Austin, I don't come from an entrepreneurial family. My family's all blue collar. And I'm like, and that question, I actually, I've traveled with this kid some and taken him to communities to speak about CEO. But a community member one time asked, "Hey, is your family entrepreneurial?" And he's like, "No, my dad doesn't know anything about business, but I'm teaching him." Right. So he created multiple businesses and made 6 figures within the first year after CEO, which is pretty impressive. But it came from a very low place, in a place where he just needed someone to see something in him outside of just his athletic prowess. So the idea I'll wrap with is in high schools, it's not too uncommon to see a student have a coach or maybe like a spiritual figure, a youth pastor, or someone who has an impact in their life. But it's very unlikely to see a business leader who is mentoring a high school student. That relationship doesn't usually show up till well after college. And so I'm a big believer in mentorship. It's in our learning environments, but that's what Ryans and the Adams and the Amelias of the world need. They need people that are advocates for them, just like the teachers in the classroom or the facilitators that are leading project-based learning. You're a big deal in these students' lives, but also how cool is it if they can connect with people from your community? So I think it's a great point for me to shut up. I would talk fast. I'm passionate, but if you've listened this long, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your stories, and that's why I want to share some. I love that you shared the geographic region, right? Like, these aren't Silicon Valley stories. Startups are everywhere. This is like the Midwest, right? Or, coast to coast. And it works in all these different school environments because the process works. Right? Like we know that, and our listeners know that. Or maybe you're just tuning in to say, what is project-based learning? This is at the heart of it, is empowering learners to have the employability skills to go out and achieve their dreams. That's what we're all looking for. Austin, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks for the invite, and keep up the good work. I'm really proud of every school district that I think every school district in America needs Magnify Learning. And I can't tell you how often I get asked by superintendents, "Hey, we need help. That's what you're doing." So I'm so proud of the work you're doing, and for everyone who's in the trenches, keep up the good work. And even when you're not recognized or seen, Ryan, I know you see the amazing educators out there. So just good job, everybody listening.
Yeah, they're awesome. So Austin, thank you. You crushed this bonus episode. It was perfect. And PBL Simplified Learners, we'll have a ton of information in the show notes, so you can go further and deeper when you're looking at CEO and see how you can engage with them or what you can steal for your own classroom, so that you can get in there and engage your learners, tackle boredom, and transform your classrooms.